The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of Afghanistan's Kunar province as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his watch. 0600 hours. His team of 20 Navy SEALs had been moving through the mountainous region for 3 days, tracking a high-value target that intelligence suggested was hiding in a remote compound near the Pakistan border. Morrison wiped the sweat from his brow as he studied the map one more time. The mission seemed straightforward enough. Infiltrate the compound, capture or eliminate the target, and extract before dawn. But something felt wrong. The intelligence had been too clean, too perfect. In his 12 years of special operations, Morrison had learned to trust his gut, and right now his gut was screaming danger. "Sir, we've got eyes on the compound," whispered Petty Officer First Class Danny Rodriguez through the radio. Rodriguez was their best scout, a young man from Texas who could move through terrain like a ghost. 2 guards visible on the northeast tower. Looks quiet otherwise. Morrison crept forward to Rodriguez's position, using his binoculars to survey the target. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by steep hills, with only one main access road winding down from the mountains. It was a perfect defensive position, too perfect for a terrorist hideout. "Something's not right," Morrison muttered to his second-in-command, Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chun. Chun had been with the teams for 8 years and had earned her place through pure skill and determination. She was one of only a handful of women in the SEALs, and she had proven herself in more firefights than most men twice her age. "I agree, sir," Chun replied, studying the compound through her own scope. "This feels like a setup. The guards are too visible, too relaxed. And where's everyone else?" Intelligence said at least 15 hostiles should be in that compound. Morrison nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. They had been inserted by helicopter 20 miles away and had made their approach on foot to avoid detection. The mission was supposed to be a quick in and out operation, but now he was having serious doubts about the intelligence they had received. "Rodriguez, what's your read on the surrounding hills?" Morrison asked into his radio. "Clear from my position, sir. But I've got a bad feeling about those ridge lines to the east and west. Perfect spots for an ambush if someone knew we were coming." Morrison felt his stomach tighten. If this was a trap, they were walking right into it. But they had their orders, and the target was supposedly a high-level Taliban commander responsible for multiple attacks on coalition forces. They couldn't just walk away without solid evidence of a setup. "All right, listen up," Morrison said into his radio, addressing all 20 members of his team. "We proceed as planned, but everyone stays extra sharp. Chun and I will take point with the assault team. Rodriguez, you and Martinez provide overwatch from the North Ridge. Thompson's team covers our 6, and Williams' squad secures the perimeter." The SEALs moved with practiced precision, each man knowing his role without hesitation. They had trained together for months, becoming a single fighting unit that could operate with minimal communication. Morrison watched as his men spread out across the terrain, each finding the perfect position to support the mission. As they approached the compound, Morrison noticed more details that bothered him. The walls were in better repair than intelligence had suggested. The generator was running quietly, indicating the compound had regular power. And, most disturbing of all, there were fresh tire tracks leading away from the main gate, tracks that looked like they had been made within the last few hours. "Chun, you seeing what I'm seeing?" Morrison whispered as they reached the outer wall. "Fresh tracks, good maintenance, and way too quiet," Chun replied. "Sir, I recommend we abort and call for backup." Morrison considered her suggestion. Chun was right. Everything about this felt wrong. But aborting meant losing their only lead on a target who had been responsible for the deaths of dozens of American soldiers. The intelligence community had been tracking this guy for months, and this was their first real chance to get him. Negative, Morrison finally decided. "We're here, and we have a job to do. But we go in fast and hard. No room for mistakes." The assault began at exactly 0630 hours. The SEALs moved like a well-oiled machine, breaching the compound walls and streaming into the courtyard. The 2 guards on the tower were neutralized quickly and quietly by the team's snipers. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. But as Morrison's team reached the main building, the trap was finally sprung. The first explosions came from the hills to the east and west, exactly where Rodriguez had predicted trouble. Rockets Mortars began raining down on the compound, and suddenly, the quiet valley erupted with gunfire from dozens of hidden positions. Ambush! Ambush! Morrison shouted into his radio as bullets began tearing through the air around them. All teams, find cover and return fire. The SEALs were caught in a perfect kill box. The compound had been abandoned except for the bait guards, and now enemy fighters were firing down on them from elevated positions on three sides. The only escape route was back the way they had come, but that path was now blocked by enemy forces that had moved in behind them during the assault. Morrison dove behind a concrete wall as automatic weapons fire chewed up the ground where he had been standing. Around the compound, his men were scrambling for whatever cover they could find, but the enemy had planned this ambush perfectly. There was precious little protection in the courtyard, and the buildings offered only temporary shelter from the devastating crossfire. "Rodriguez, what's your status?" Morrison called into his radio. "We're pinned down on the north ridge, sir." Rodriguez's voice crackled through the static. "At least 20 hostiles moving up from the valley floor. We can't get clear shots on the guys hitting you from up here." Morrison's mind raced as he tried to assess their situation. They were outnumbered at least 3-1, caught in an open area with limited cover, and surrounded on three sides. The enemy had clearly known they were coming and had prepared accordingly. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone had leaked their mission details. "Chun, what's your count on casualties?" Morrison asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the chaos around them. 2 wounded so far, sir," Chun replied from her position behind an overturned vehicle. "Williams took shrapnel in his shoulder, and Martinez has a bullet wound in his leg. Both are still combat effective, but we need to get them medical attention soon." The enemy fire was intensifying, and Morrison could see muzzle flashes from at least a dozen different positions in the surrounding hills. They had walked into a perfectly planned ambush, and now they were fighting for their lives with minimal cover and no clear escape route. "Sir, we need to call for extraction now," Petty Officer Thompson shouted over the sound of gunfire. "This is a no-win situation." Morrison grabbed his radio and switched to the emergency frequency. "Overlord, this is Trident 6. We are in contact with a superior enemy force and request immediate extraction. Grid coordinates follow." The response was immediate but devastating. "Trident 6, this is Overlord. Negative on extraction at this time. Heavy weather moving in, and we have no available air assets in your area. Earliest possible pickup is 1800 hours. Hold your position and wait for further instructions." Morrison felt his heart sink. 1800 hours was 12 hours away. With their current ammunition supplies and the intensity of enemy fire, they would never last that long. They were effectively on their own, trapped in a kill box with no backup and no way out. "Did everyone copy that transmission?" Morrison asked his team. The responses came back grim and determined. His men understood what they were facing, but not one of them suggested surrender. They were Navy SEALs, and they would fight until their last breath if necessary. "All right, listen up," Morrison said, his voice carrying the calm authority that had made him a successful team leader. "We're in a bad spot, but we're not dead yet. We conserve ammunition, we make every shot count, and we hold this position until help arrives. Rodriguez, can you and Martinez work your way to higher ground and start picking off their leaders?" "Already on it, sir," Rodriguez replied. "We're moving to the East Ridge. Should have clear shots in about 10 minutes. Thompson, I need your team to secure the south wall. That's our weakest point right now. Williams, despite your wound, you're our best marksman. Find a good position and start making these guys think twice about showing their heads." "Copy that, sir," came the responses. Morrison looked around at his men, scattered across the compound, but still fighting with the precision and courage that made the SEALs legendary. They were in the fight of their lives, but they weren't giving up. Not yet. As the morning wore on, the battle settled into a deadly rhythm. The enemy would surge forward, trying to overrun the SEALs' positions, and each time they would be driven back by accurate rifle fire and the occasional grenade. But with each attack, the SEALs' ammunition supplies dwindled, and their situation became more desperate. By noon, they had been fighting for over 5 hours. 3 more men had been wounded, including Chun, who had taken a bullet through her arm but refused medical attention until the firefight was over. Their water supplies were running low in the blazing Afghan heat, and Morrison could see the exhaustion beginning to show on his men's faces. "Sir, we're down to our last magazines," Williams reported during a brief lull in the fighting. "At this rate, we'll be throwing rocks at them in another hour." Morrison nodded grimly. He had been doing the math in his head, and the numbers weren't good. They had maybe 90 minutes of ammunition left at their current rate of fire, and the enemy showed no signs of backing down. In fact, it seemed like more fighters were arriving every hour, drawn by the sound of battle or called in as reinforcements. "Options?" Morrison asked Chun, despite her wound. "We could try to break out to the north," Chun suggested, wincing as she adjusted her position. "Rodriguez and Martinez have been thinning out their numbers on that side. If we move fast and hard, we might punch through." Morrison considered the idea. Breaking out would mean abandoning their defensive positions and making a run across open ground while under fire. It was risky, but staying put was becoming impossible. They simply didn't have enough ammunition to hold their position until evening. "Sir, incoming transmission," reported their radio operator, Petty Officer Johnson. "It's on our emergency frequency." Morrison took the handset, hoping for word of an early extraction. Instead, he heard a voice he didn't recognize, a female voice with a slight southern accent. "Trident 6, this is Falcon. I'm a sniper with the 101st Airborne, operating independently in your area. I can see your position and the enemy forces surrounding you. I'm in position to provide support if you need it." Morrison's heart leaped. A friendly sniper in the area could change everything. But something about the transmission bothered him. Why hadn't this sniper been mentioned in their mission briefing? And what was someone from the 101st doing operating alone in this remote area? "Falcon, this is Trident 6, Morrison replied cautiously. "What's your location and unit designation?" "Sir, I'm approximately 800 meters southeast of your position, on a ridge overlooking the valley. My unit designation is complicated. I'm operating under special orders, but I can provide immediate fire support if you need it." Morrison looked at Chun, who shrugged despite her wound. At this point, they couldn't afford to be picky about where help came from. "Falcon, we are in desperate need of fire support," Morrison said into the radio. "We've got enemy positions on 3 sides, grid coordinates as follows." As Morrison transmitted their situation to the mysterious sniper, he had no idea that this female voice would soon become their only hope of survival. The woman calling herself Falcon was about to make a decision that would go against every regulation in the military handbook, and, in doing so, would save the lives of 20 Navy SEALs who had been written off as dead by their own command. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez pressed her eye to the scope of her M110 sniper rifle and studied the chaos unfolding in the valley below. Through the crosshairs, she could see the Navy SEALs pinned down in the compound, their situation growing more desperate by the hour. She had been watching the battle for 3 hours now, torn between her orders and her conscience. Vasquez was supposed to be conducting a solo reconnaissance mission, gathering intelligence on enemy troop movements in the region. Her orders were explicit: observe and report only, maintain radio silence except for scheduled check-ins, and under no circumstances engage the enemy or compromise her position. She was a ghost, invisible and untouchable, gathering vital information that would be used to plan future operations. But watching 20 Americans fight for their lives while she sat safely hidden in the rocks was tearing her apart. Elena had grown up in a small town in Texas, the daughter of a Marine veteran who had taught her to shoot when she was 8 years old. She had joined the Army at 18, driven by a desire to serve her country and prove that a woman could excel in any role the military had to offer. 5 years later, she was one of the best snipers in the Army, with 43 confirmed kills and a reputation for never missing when it counted. She had been in Afghanistan for 8 months now, part of a special program that placed elite snipers in remote positions to gather intelligence and provide long-range fire support when needed. It was dangerous work, operating alone for weeks at a time with minimal backup, but Elena thrived on the challenge and the responsibility. Through her scope, she watched as one of the SEALs, a young man who couldn't be more than 25, dove for cover as bullets sparked off the concrete around him. The enemy fighters were getting bolder, moving closer to the compound as they realized their prey was running out of ammunition. Elena estimated the SEALs had maybe an hour of fighting left in them before they would be overrun. Her radio crackled with another transmission from the SEAL commander, requesting immediate extraction. The response was the same as before: no available assets. Hold position. Wait for evening pickup. Elena knew what that meant. By evening, there would be nothing left to pick up but bodies. She checked her watch. 1,347 hours. The enemy was massing for what looked like a final assault, gathering in the dead spaces between the ridgelines where the SEALs couldn't see them. Elena counted at least 40 fighters moving into position, more than twice the number of Americans trapped in the compound. This is wrong, she whispered to herself, adjusting her rifle to track a group of Taliban fighters moving through the rocks. She had clear shots on at least 6 of them, perfect angles that would drop them before they even knew what hit them. But her orders were clear: maintain position, do not engage, do not compromise the mission. Elena thought about her father, Master Sergeant Carlos Vazquez, who had served 3 tours in Vietnam before she was born. He had always told her that the most important thing in combat wasn't following orders, it was bringing your people home. Orders are important, Mija, he used to say, but your conscience is more important. When you can save lives, you save them, no matter what anyone tells you. She watched as the enemy fighters reached their assault positions. In minutes, they would launch a coordinated attack that would overwhelm the SEALs' remaining defenses. Elena made her decision. She keyed her radio to the emergency frequency she had been monitoring. Trident 6, this is Falcon. I'm a sniper with the 101st Airborne, operating independently in your area. I can see your position and the enemy forces surrounding you. I'm in position to provide support if you need it. The response came back immediately, desperate but cautious. The SEAL commander wanted to know her location and unit designation, standard security protocol that Elena couldn't answer honestly without revealing her classified mission. Sir, I'm approximately 800 meters southeast of your position, on a ridge overlooking the valley. My unit designation is complicated. I'm operating under special orders, but I can provide immediate fire support if you need it. Elena heard the brief pause as the SEAL commander consulted with his team. She used the time to range her targets, adjusting her scope for the distance and wind conditions. 800 meters was a challenging shot, but well within her capabilities. The M110 was accurate to over 1,000 meters in the right hands, and Elena had some of the best hands in the army. Falcon, we are in desperate need of fire support, came the reply. We've got enemy positions on 3 sides, grid coordinates as follows. As the SEAL commander transmitted their tactical situation, Elena was already moving. She identified the enemy machine gun positions that were doing the most damage, marking each one in her mind and planning her engagement sequence. She would have to move fast once she started shooting. The enemy would quickly figure out where the fire was coming from, and her position would become untenable. Trident 6, I have eyes on your situation, Elena transmitted. I count approximately 40 enemy fighters in assault positions, with at least 3 machine gun teams providing covering fire. I can take out their heavy weapons first, but once I start shooting, they're going to know where I am. You'll need to be ready to move when I give you the signal. Roger that, Falcon. We're ready to move on your command. Elena took a deep breath and settled into her shooting position. The first target was a PCAM machine gun team positioned on a rocky outcrop about 50 meters above the compound. The gunner was partially concealed behind a boulder, but Elena could see enough of his torso to make the shot count. She controlled her breathing, letting her heart rate slow as she had been trained. The crosshairs settled on the center of the gunner's chest, and Elena gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through the scope she saw the enemy gunner jerk backward and fall. His assistant gunner looked around in confusion for a split second before Elena's second shot dropped him as well. Machine gun team 1 is down, Elena reported, already shifting to her next target. Moving to target 2. The second machine gun position was more challenging. The team was dug in behind a wall of stacked rocks with only their heads visible. Elena waited patiently for one of them to expose more of his body, and when the assistant gunner stood up to get a better angle on the compound, she put a bullet through his spine. The gunner turned to check on his partner, giving Elena the shot she needed. Target 2 eliminated, she reported, feeling the familiar calm that came over her during combat. Shifting to Target 3. The 3rd machine gun team had realized they were under fire from a sniper and were trying to relocate to a more protected position. Elena tracked them as they moved, leading the gunner slightly to account for his movement. The bullet caught him center mass just as he reached what he thought was safety behind a large rock. All machine gun teams are down, Trident 6, Elena reported. Enemy is falling back and trying to reorganize. Now would be a good time to shift your positions. Through her scope, Elena could see the effect her accurate fire was having on the enemy forces. They were confused and demoralized, no longer sure where the shots were coming from or how many snipers they were facing. Several fighters had broken and were retreating up the hillsides, while others were frantically trying to find cover from an enemy they couldn't see. But Elena knew her advantage wouldn't last long. Already, she could see enemy fighters with binoculars scanning the ridgelines, trying to locate her position. It would only be a matter of minutes before they figured out where she was shooting from. "Falcon, this is Trident 6, came the radio call. "Outstanding shooting. We're moving to more defensible positions now. What's your ammunition status?" Elena checked her remaining rounds. She had started the mission with 60 rounds of 7.62 mm ammunition, and she had already used 8. Plenty for a normal reconnaissance mission, but in a sustained firefight, she would run out quickly if she wasn't careful with her shots. "I've got 52 rounds remaining," she reported. "I can provide covering fire for your movement, but I can't hold them off indefinitely." "Understood. We're going to try to break out to the north side of the compound. Can you cover that approach?" Elena shifted her position slightly to get a better angle on the northern approach to the compound. Through her scope, she could see several enemy fighters positioned among the rocks, waiting to ambush any SEALs who tried to escape in that direction. "I have eyes on the north approach," Elena confirmed. "Multiple hostiles in position, but I can clear a path for you. On my mark, move fast, and keep your heads down." Elena began engaging the enemy fighters on the northern slope, picking them off one by one with methodical precision. Each shot was perfectly placed, dropping her targets before they could return fire or alert their comrades. She watched through her scope as the SEALs began their movement, staying low and using every bit of available cover. But just as the SEALs reached the northern wall of the compound, Elena's position was finally discovered. A sharp-eyed enemy spotter had seen the muzzle flash from her last shot and was pointing directly at her location. Within seconds, rifle fire began impacting the rocks around her position. "Falcon, you've been spotted," the SEAL commander called over the radio. "Can you relocate?" Elena was already moving, grabbing her rifle and equipment as bullets whined overhead. Her carefully chosen sniper position was now a death trap, and she had to find new cover before the enemy could bring more firepower to bear on her location. She low-crawled across the rocky ridge, seeking a new position that would give her a clear field of fire while providing adequate protection. Behind her, she could hear the enemy fighters shouting to each other in Dari and Pashto, coordinating their search for the sniper who had been wreaking havoc on their assault. "Trident 6, this is Falcon," Elena reported as she settled into a new position about 100 meters from her original spot. "I'm relocating but still have eyes on your position. Status report. We're halfway to the northern perimeter," came the reply. "But we've got company moving to intercept us. At least 10 hostiles approaching from the northeast." Elena scanned the area with her scope and quickly found the enemy fighters the SEAL commander was referring to. They were moving in a tactical formation, trying to cut off the Americans' escape route. Elena began engaging them immediately, her accurate fire disrupting their advance and forcing them to take cover. "Targets engaged," she reported. "Path is clear, but not for long. You need to move now." As Elena provided covering fire, she found herself thinking about her father again. He had always taught her that being a soldier wasn't about following orders blindly. It was about making the hard choices that others couldn't or wouldn't make. Right now, 20 American lives hung in the balance, and Elena was the only person in position to save them. Her radio crackled with another transmission, but this one wasn't from the SEALs. It was from her own command, and the voice was angry and demanding. "Falcon, this is Overwatch. We have monitored unauthorized radio transmissions from your position. You are ordered to maintain radio silence and Disengage from all combat operations immediately. Confirm receipt of this order. Elena stared at her radio for a moment, then turned the volume down until the voice was barely audible. She had made her choice, and she wasn't going to let bureaucracy and regulations get 20 good men killed. Her father would have been proud. Falcon, what's your status? Came another call from the SEALs. I'm here, Elena replied, settling her crosshairs on another enemy target. And I'm not going anywhere. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the ambush began, the SEALs had hope. They had an angel watching over them from the ridge, a guardian angel with a rifle and the skill to use it. Elena Vasquez had defied her orders and compromised her mission, but she had given 20 condemned men a chance to see home again. Now all she had to do was keep them alive long enough to make that chance count. The afternoon heat was becoming unbearable as Elena Vasquez wiped the sweat from her forehead and adjusted her grip on the M110. She had been in continuous contact with the enemy for over 4 hours now, and her ammunition supply was dwindling faster than she had hoped. Every shot had to count, and the pressure was beginning to show. Below in the valley, the Navy SEALs had managed to consolidate their position near the northern wall of the compound, but they were still trapped and outnumbered. The enemy had adapted to the presence of a sniper, moving more cautiously and using better cover, which made Elena's job much harder. She was no longer picking off targets at will. Now she had to wait for perfect opportunities that might not come. Falcon, this is Trident 6, came the familiar voice of Lieutenant Commander Morrison over the radio. We've got movement on the East Ridge. Looks like they're trying to flank us again. Elena swung her scope to the east and immediately spotted the problem. A group of 8 enemy fighters was working their way around the ridgeline, staying low and using the terrain to mask their movement. If they reached their intended position, they would have a clear shot at the SEALs' new defensive position. I see them, Elena replied, tracking the lead fighter through her crosshairs. Moving to engage. The shot was challenging. The targets were partially concealed and moving at an angle that made it difficult to lead them properly. Elena waited for the perfect moment when the lead fighter paused to signal his men, then squeezed the trigger. The bullet found its mark, dropping the fighter and causing his companions to scatter for cover. Elena quickly shifted to engage the scattered fighters, but they had learned from watching their comrades die throughout the day. They were using proper cover and concealment now, exposing themselves only for split seconds before moving to new positions. She managed to get clean shots on 2 more before the rest disappeared into the rocks. 3 down, 5 scattered, Elena reported. They're getting smarter about how they move. Copy that. We can see the remaining 5 from our position. Thanks for buying us some time. Elena checked her ammunition count again. 31 rounds left. At her current rate of expenditure, she would be down to her pistol within 2 hours. The thought was sobering. Without her rifle, she would be virtually useless to the SEALs trapped below. Her radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't the SEALs calling for support. It was her own command, and the voice belonged to Colonel Marcus Webb, her unit commander. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, this is Colonel Webb. You will acknowledge this transmission immediately. Elena hesitated for a moment, then keyed her radio. She had been ignoring her command for hours now, but a direct order from her colonel was harder to dismiss. This is Vasquez, she replied reluctantly. Sergeant, you are in direct violation of your mission orders and are engaging in unauthorized combat operations. You will cease all hostile activities immediately and report to the designated extraction point for immediate return to base. Elena felt anger surge through her as she watched another group of enemy fighters moving to surround the SEALs. How could her command order her to abandon 20 Americans who were fighting for their lives? Sir, I have 20 Navy SEALs pinned down in a valley with no available extraction, Elena replied. They'll be overrun within hours if I don't provide support. That is not your concern, Sergeant. Your mission is reconnaissance only. The SEALs have their own chain of command and their own support systems. You are compromising a vital intelligence gathering operation by revealing your position. Elena looked through her scope at the SEALs below. She could see Morrison crouched behind a concrete wall, his uniform torn and bloody from the day's fighting. Near him, Master Chief Chun was treating another wounded SEAL, her own arm bandaged from an earlier injury. These weren't just call signs on a radio. They were real people with families and loved ones waiting for them at home. Sir, with respect, their support systems have failed them, Elena replied. No extraction is available until 1800 hours, and they don't have the ammunition to last that long. I'm the only thing standing between them and a massacre. Sergeant Vasquez, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Return to base for court-martial proceedings. That is a direct order. Elena stared at her radio for a long moment, then made a decision that would change her military career forever. She switched off the command frequency and tuned back to the emergency channel the SEALs were using. Trident 6, this is Falcon, she transmitted. What's your ammunition status? Down to our last few magazines, came Morrison's grim reply. Maybe 30 minutes of sustained fire left, 45 if we're conservative. Any word on extraction? Elena checked her watch. 1,530 hours. Still 2.5 hours until the promised evening pickup, assuming the weather held and helicopters became available. At their current rate of ammunition consumption, the SEALs would be defenseless long before help arrived. Negative on early extraction, Elena replied. But I'm not going anywhere. We're going to get you guys out of this. As if to emphasize their desperate situation, the enemy chose that moment to launch another coordinated assault. Elena watched through her scope as at least 30 fighters emerged from concealed positions and began advancing on the SEALs' position from multiple directions. The attack was better coordinated than the previous attempts, with covering fire from multiple positions and fighters moving in short rushes between cover points. Contact! Contact! Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. All positions, they're coming from the east and south simultaneously. Elena immediately began engaging the assault force, prioritizing targets that posed the greatest threat to the SEALs. She dropped the lead fighter on the eastern approach, then shifted to engage a machine gunner who was setting up to provide covering fire for the assault. Her third shot took down another fighter who was carrying what looked like an RPG. But for every enemy fighter Elena eliminated, 2 more seemed to take his place. The enemy had clearly received reinforcements during the afternoon, and they were willing to accept heavy casualties to overrun the trapped Americans. Falcon, we're being overrun on the south side, came an urgent call from one of the SEALs. Multiple fighters have reached the compound wall. Elena shifted her scope to the southern wall and saw the problem immediately. While she had been focused on the eastern assault, a group of enemy fighters had managed to reach the compound wall using a covered approach she couldn't observe from her position. They were now within grenade range of the SEALs' position, a development that could prove catastrophic. I can't get a clear shot on the south wall from here, Elena reported. You're going to have to handle them with small arms. The firefight intensified as the SEALs engaged the enemy fighters at close range. Elena could hear the distinctive sound of American M4 rifles mixing with the chatter of AK-47s and PCAM machine guns. Through her scope, she watched muzzle flashes strobing from the compound as both sides poured fire into each other at almost point-blank range. Elena continued to engage targets on the eastern approach, trying to prevent more enemy fighters from reaching the compound wall. But she was fighting a losing battle. There were simply too many targets and not enough ammunition to engage them all effectively. Trident 6, you need to fall back to a more defensible position, Elena transmitted. You can't hold that spot much longer. Negative, Falcon, came Morrison's reply. We've got 2 men too badly wounded to move, and there's nowhere to fall back to. We hold here or we die here. Elena felt her heart sink. The SEALs were trapped with no way out, their ammunition nearly exhausted, and facing an enemy force that seemed to grow larger by the hour. Even with her sniper support, the mathematics of the situation were stark. 20 Americans against at least 60 enemy fighters, with no reinforcements coming until evening. She took a deep breath and made another decision that went against every regulation in the military handbook. If the SEALs couldn't come to her, she would go to them. Trident 6, I'm coming down, Elena transmitted as she began packing her equipment. I can provide more effective support from closer range. Negative, Falcon. Morrison's voice was sharp with concern. You're too valuable where you are. Don't compromise your position. My position is already compromised, Elena replied, slinging her rifle across her back. The enemy has been bracketing my location with mortar fire for the last 10 minutes. I'm more useful to you alive and mobile than dead and stuck on this ridge. Elena began working her way down the rocky slope toward the compound, moving carefully to avoid detection, but as quickly as the terrain allowed. She had abandoned her overwatch position and was now committed to a close-quarters fight alongside the SEALs. It was a decision that flew in the face of every sniper doctrine she had been taught, but it was the only way she could see to keep the Americans alive. As she moved through the rocks, Elena could hear the battle raging below. The sound of gunfire was almost continuous now, punctuated by the occasional explosion of a grenade or mortar round. The enemy was pressing their assault with renewed vigor, sensing that the Americans were nearly out of ammunition and options. Halfway down the slope, Elena found a new firing position that gave her a clear view of the southern approach to the compound. From this angle, she could see the enemy fighters who had reached the compound wall, and, more importantly, she had clean shots on them. Elena settled into a prone position and began systematically engaging the enemy fighters at the wall. At closer range, her shots were even more devastating, dropping targets with precision that demoralized the surviving attackers. Within minutes, she had eliminated 6 fighters and forced the rest to retreat from their advanced positions. "Nice shooting, Falcon," came Morrison's voice over the radio. "Pressure's off the south wall for now." "Roger that. I'm repositioning to get a better angle on the eastern approach." Elena continued her movement down the slope, leapfrogging between firing positions as she provided support to the embattled SEALs. It was dangerous work. She was now within range of enemy small arms fire, and her movement made her vulnerable to detection. But it was also more effective than her long-range sniping had been. At closer range, she could see targets that had been invisible from the ridge, and her shots had immediate tactical impact. As the afternoon wore on, Elena found herself becoming an integral part of the SEALs' defense. She was no longer just providing fire support. She was part of their fighting team, coordinating her movements with theirs and filling gaps in their defensive line that would otherwise have been fatal weaknesses. "Falcon, you're one hell of a soldier," Morrison transmitted during a brief lull in the fighting. "When we get out of this, remind me to buy you a beer." "I'll hold you to that," Elena replied, smiling despite their desperate situation. "But let's focus on the getting out part first." Elena checked her ammunition count one more time. 18 rounds left in her rifle, plus 3 magazines for her pistol. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, and she could see storm clouds gathering in the distance. The promised extraction was still hours away, and the enemy showed no signs of giving up. But for the first time since the battle began, Elena felt a spark of hope. She was no longer fighting alone on a distant ridge. She was part of a team, 21 American warriors who refused to give up despite impossible odds. Together, they might just have a chance to see another sunrise. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Elena Vasquez fired her last rifle round, watching through her scope as another enemy fighter crumpled to the ground. She had been fighting alongside the Navy SEALs for over 2 hours now, and her M110 sniper rifle was finally empty. Around her, the compound was littered with spent brass casings and the debris of a day-long battle that had pushed 21 American warriors to their absolute limits. "That's it for the rifle," Elena reported into her radio as she unslung her M9 pistol. "Switching to secondary weapon." "Copy that, Falcon," came the weary voice of Lieutenant Commander Morrison. "How many rounds do you have left?" Elena checked her remaining pistol magazines. 45 rounds of 9mm. "After that, we're down to harsh language and thrown rocks." Despite their desperate situation, she heard a few chuckles over the radio from the SEALs. These men had been fighting for their lives for almost 12 hours. Several were wounded, all were exhausted. But they still maintained the dark humor that helped warriors cope with impossible situations. Elena looked around the compound, assessing their tactical situation as the sun continued to sink toward the horizon. The SEALs had taken casualties throughout the day, 5 men wounded, 2 seriously enough that they needed immediate medical attention. Master Chief Chun was still fighting despite the bullet wound in her arm, and Petty Officer Williams had refused evacuation despite the shrapnel in his shoulder. They were down to their last few magazines of ammunition, and the enemy showed no signs of backing down. But they had accomplished something remarkable during the afternoon. Working together, Elena and the SEALs had turned a hopeless situation into a fighting chance. Her accurate sniper fire had broken up every enemy assault, while the SEALs' disciplined defensive tactics had prevented the enemy from overrunning their position. They were still outnumbered and outgunned, but they were no longer helpless victims waiting to be slaughtered. Movement on the northern ridge, reported Petty Officer Rodriguez from his overwatch position. Looks like they're massing for another assault. Elena shifted her position to get a better view of the northern approach. Through her binoculars, she could see at least 20 enemy fighters gathering in the shadows between the rocks. They were being more cautious now, having learned to respect the accuracy of American marksmanship, but they were still preparing for what looked like a final coordinated attack. I count 20 on the north ridge, Elena reported. Probably more that I can't see. They're waiting for darkness to make their move. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. What's the status on extraction? Elena checked her watch. 1,745 hours. The promised pickup was supposed to arrive at 1,800 hours, but that assumed the weather would hold and helicopters would be available. Looking at the storm clouds gathering in the distance, Elena wasn't optimistic about either assumption. Still 15 minutes until scheduled extraction, she replied. But those storm clouds are moving in fast. If the weather turns bad, we could be looking at a much longer wait. As if to emphasize her point, a rumble of thunder rolled across the valley, and Elena felt the first drops of rain on her face. In Afghanistan's mountainous regions, weather could change from clear skies to violent thunderstorms in a matter of minutes, and helicopter operations became impossible when visibility dropped to zero. All positions, prepare for final assault, Morrison ordered over the radio. They're going to hit us hard before the extraction arrives. Make every round count. And remember, nobody gets left behind. Elena settled into a firing position next to a concrete wall that had been chewed up by bullets throughout the day. Around her, the SEALs were checking their weapons and redistributing their remaining ammunition. Despite their exhaustion and wounds, they moved with the professionalism that made them the most elite fighting force in the world. The enemy assault began just as the rain started falling in earnest. Elena heard the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds and dove for cover as explosions erupted around the compound. Through the smoke and dust, she could see enemy fighters advancing from 3 directions, using the mortar barrage to mask their movement. Contact! Contact! Morrison shouted into his radio. They're coming from all sides. Elena opened fire with her pistol, engaging targets at closer range than she had ever fought before. The M9 was designed for close-quarters combat, not the precision shooting she was accustomed to, but she made each shot count. At 50 meters, she could still hit center mass consistently, and her accurate fire helped slow the enemy advance on the eastern approach. To her left, she could see Master Chief Chen firing controlled bursts from her M4 rifle despite her wounded arm. The Master Chief moved with the fluid grace of a warrior who had been in countless firefights, always in the right position at the right time to support her teammates. Even wounded, Chen was still one of the most dangerous fighters Elena had ever seen. The enemy fighters were closer now than they had been all day, some within 30 meters of the compound walls. Elena could see their faces clearly, could hear them shouting to each other in Dari as they coordinated their assault. She engaged a fighter who was trying to throw a grenade over the wall, dropping him before he could complete his throw. Falcon, behind you. Morrison's voice cut through the noise of battle. Elena spun around to see an enemy fighter who had somehow gotten inside the compound, his AK-47 swinging toward her position. She had a split second to react, bringing her pistol up and firing 3 quick shots center mass. The fighter stumbled and fell, his weapon clattering across the concrete. Thanks for the heads up, Elena called to Morrison, who nodded grimly from his position across the courtyard. The firefight continued to rage as the rain intensified, turning the compound into a muddy mess that made movement treacherous. Elena's pistol was getting slippery in her hands, and she had to constantly wipe the rain from her eyes to maintain clear vision. Around her, the SEALs were fighting with the same intensity, their voices calm and professional even as bullets cracked overhead. 2 minutes of ammunition left, reported Petty Officer Thompson from the south wall. After that, we're going hand-to-hand. Elena checked her own ammunition status. 12 rounds left in her current magazine, plus one spare. Not enough to last much longer in a sustained firefight. She looked around the compound, noting positions where they might make their last stand when their ammunition ran out completely. But, just as the situation seemed hopeless, Elena heard a sound that made her heart leap with joy. The distinctive whop-whop-whop of helicopter rotors approaching through the storm. Through the rain and smoke, she could see the dark shapes of two Black Hawk helicopters descending toward the valley, their door gunners already engaging enemy positions with 7.62 mm machine guns. Extraction is inbound. Morrison shouted over the radio. All teams prepare for immediate evacuation. The arrival of the helicopters changed the dynamics of the battle instantly. The enemy fighters, who had been pressing their assault aggressively, suddenly found themselves under attack from above. The door gunners' accurate fire scattered the assault force and forced them to seek cover, buying the Americans precious time to prepare for extraction. Trident 6, this is Eagle 1, came a new voice over the radio. We're taking heavy ground fire, but we can get you out of there. Prepare for fast rope extraction from the southern LZ. Elena looked toward the designated landing zone, a small clearing about 200 meters south of the compound. The area was partially protected from enemy fire by a ridge line, but reaching it would require crossing open ground under hostile observation. All teams, movement by fire teams to the LZ, Morrison ordered. Wounded go first, then we leapfrog by squads. Falcon, you're with the first group. Elena was about to protest that she should cover the rear guard, but Morrison's expression brooked no argument. You've done more than enough, he said. Time to get you home. The extraction proceeded with the same precision that had kept the SEALs alive throughout the day. The wounded were moved first, carried by their teammates across the muddy ground toward the landing zone. Elena found herself running through the rain alongside Master Chief Chun, both women providing covering fire as their teammates moved. Behind them, the remaining SEALs fell back by fire teams, each group providing cover for the next as they executed a textbook tactical withdrawal. The enemy tried to pursue, but the helicopter door gunners kept them pinned down with devastating accurate fire. Elena reached the landing zone just as the first Black Hawk touched down, its rotors whipping the rain into a stinging spray that made visibility almost zero. She helped load the wounded SEALs into the helicopter, then climbed aboard herself as the aircraft lifted off into the stormy sky. As the helicopter gained altitude, Elena looked down at the compound where she had spent the last 8 hours fighting for her life alongside 20 American warriors. The enemy fighters were already moving into the abandoned position, but it was too late. The Americans were gone, snatched from certain death by the skill of their helicopter crews, and the refusal of 21 people to give up when the odds seemed impossible. Falcon, Morrison's voice came through her headset as the second helicopter joined them in formation. I don't know what your real name is or what unit you're really with, but I want you to know, you saved 20 lives today. Whatever consequences you face for breaking your orders, it was worth it. Elena smiled as she watched the lights of Bagram Air Base appearing through the storm clouds ahead. She knew she would face court-martial proceedings for disobeying direct orders and compromising her classified mission. Her military career was probably over, and she might even face prison time for her actions. But, looking around the helicopter at the faces of the men she had helped save, Elena felt no regret. Her father had taught her that the most important thing in combat was bringing your people home, and today she had done exactly that. 20 Navy SEALs would see their families again because one Army sniper had chosen to follow her conscience instead of her orders. As the helicopters approached the base, Elena closed her eyes and thought about the events of the day. She had gone into the mountains as Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, following orders and gathering intelligence. She was coming back as something different, a soldier who had learned that sometimes doing the right thing required breaking the rules. The story of 20 SEALs left for dead would become legend within the special operations community, but the full truth of how a female Army sniper had defied protocol to save their lives would remain classified for years to come. Elena Vasquez would face her court-martial with dignity, knowing that when it mattered most, she had made the choice that her father would have been proud of. In the end, that was all that mattered. 3 months later, Elena sat in a military courtroom as the judge read the verdict of her court-martial. She was found guilty of disobeying direct orders and compromising a classified operation, but the sentence was suspended due to the extraordinary circumstances of her actions. Instead of prison time, she was given an honorable discharge and a letter of reprimand that would follow her for the rest of her career. But as Elena walked out of the courtroom, she was met by Lieutenant Commander Morrison and the 19 other SEALs whose lives she had saved. They had come to thank her one more time and to let her know that she would always have a place in their brotherhood. "You kept your promise," Morrison said with a smile. "Now how about that beer?" Elena Vasquez had lost her military career, but she had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that when faced with an impossible choice, she had chosen to save lives rather than follow orders. It was a decision that would define her for the rest of her life, and one she would never regret.